mission piece about a year ago, a little over a year ago. Our website is mission-peace.org. Think of the dash as a bridge. And I really founded it because I saw lots of my friends and family members fighting with one another. And for years before that, I worked for the Love and Logic Institute. And I really feel like I've become an emotional intelligence expert, kind of by accident, but also because I've just always been fascinated with what makes people tick, what makes them do what they do. And I tried really hard to foster peace between people that I cared about who were going at each other. And if you've spent any time on social media, you've probably seen this, where people really so part of the mission of Mission Peace was to foster better relationships and more peace between especially people in authority. So law enforcement, and going way back, my main audience was teachers, especially teachers that worked with really tougher students, tougher kids. And so that's how I kind of landed in this space. And I absolutely love helping people get better with other people.
Right. Such a basic but fundamental and important overlooked aspect of emotional intelligence and just organizational dynamics in general.
I always say, if you're good with people, we'll make you better.
Right. That's a good slogan in an area not enough people focus on. So when we think about, so just sort of diving into what you do and what Mission Peace does, I know one of the things you just mentioned and you and I have talked about before is this whole concept of emotional intelligence. Maybe you help us understand what is emotional intelligence? How does it apply to us as humans, to organizations? What is it?
Yeah, I measure it a little differently than other emotional intelligence experts. People will even use, if you think about IQ, that they'll use EQ as a measurement of your emotional intelligence. And to me, it's not just what you know. I try to take it one notch more practical and really tune into how effective you are, basically intentionally affecting other people in the way that you want to. We have 6 principles at Mission Peace, and our first is respectful engagement. We try to be very proactive, and so you're deciding to be respectful even before the interaction starts. You're sort of making a commitment that we're going to engage respectfully before it even starts. And our kind of tagline throughout these live trainings, I mostly do live training and in-person consulting. I'm big on that stuff. Our tagline throughout is that intentionality wins the day. Intentionality will pull us into greatness in whatever the area is. But I go back to the old, if people remember the old Jerry Springer shows, they'd usually bring people on stage intentionally to get them screaming at each other for the entertainment of the audience. And you'd see one person get louder and then the other person would get louder, and they would interrupt each other at quicker and quicker intervals. I teach de-escalation and emotional intelligence. What we've found is that the person being intentional can actually bring the other person down. Intentionality tends to win the day. And so if I've set out ahead of time with this goal and I'm more proactive as the other person is being more reactive, I can usually have the desired outcome, or at least I can control my part of the equation and stay classy and stay employed. That was one of the big deals with teachers, is let's not do anything that's going to jeopardize our career. So that's, to me, emotional intelligence is first and foremost about intentionality. And then we start with ourselves. We start with a self-awareness and then move into other awareness and empathy and the factors that make us good at this stuff.
Right. Yeah. And it seems like, you talk about Jerry Springer back in the 90s or whenever that was, that he was around, but it seems like in today's day and age, in today's culture throughout the world, not just even in the United States, it seems especially prevalent in the United States just because that's where you and I are, but even in other parts of the world, it just seems like people's opinions and views of each other have just sort of diverged and become more extreme, and you have a lot more Jerry Springer moments, it feels like, every day, and people you deal with personally on a personal level or even organizationally within organizations as well.
Yeah, that's my mission. Fewer Jerry Springer moments, fewer bad YouTube videos involving people in authority, and either having lose their temper and misuse their power or their authority. And that goes back to love and logic. That's my first mission as a parent, is not to ever misuse or abuse the power that I have when I'm trying to raise kids. So that's where this really started for me. And as you know, those principles apply just across human interaction.
Right. Right. Yeah. And in fact, when I had first reached out to you about potentially being a guest on my show here, the reason is because of your love and logic background. And I knew of you obviously from high school and had been following you over the years. And I knew you were a love and logic type person even before you started Mission Piece. And, when I had just a quick backstory that I think will kind of relate this back to the whole concept of organizational transformation, digital transformation, business transformation, all that stuff. But I've always been an organizational change consultant since I started my career in the late 90s out of grad school. And about 10 years ago, I met my wife, who had 2 young children, and we got married. And so I had stepkids, and I had never been a parent before. And so she and I both read Love and Logic because I needed to figure out what in the heck I was doing, because I had no idea what I was doing. So I figured, well, I'll read a book. I'll read Love and Logic. And she had heard of it, and we both read it together. But not only has that helped me with parenting, but it's actually helped me tremendously in the corporate world, being a consultant, because so many of the principles in Love and Logic you can use on just other individuals, executives and managers, frontline people, which we can get into maybe a little bit more as we talk here. But I think the Love and Logic principles, it if I'm correct, it didn't start. It was intended for a parenting sort of philosophy, right? Like how to parent and raise better kids.
Yes, way back in the 1970s, Jim Fay started it, and that was exactly the idea: is give parents tools to empower their kids to become better decision makers. So no surprise that these same principles are great tools in the hands of a consultant. That Love and Logic is that you be more of a consultant than a helicopter who's rescuing, or a drill sergeant who's always barking orders. I worked closely with them for about a dozen years, and got to travel around, speak with Jim Fay and Dr. Charles Fay, his son, who now runs the company. They did downsize quite a bit over COVID, sadly, because a lot of live presentations and a lot of business in schools, and schools quickly had to pivot to other priorities during COVID. But still a wonderful organization, wonderful information, and I'm always pleased that I get to continue to share their message, which is essentially, it's based on really good principles just with human beings. Things like preserving the dignity of another human being, shared thinking, shared control, and empathy. I mean, that's basically what Love and Logic is all about. It's not just a way to get your kid to eat their vegetables. These are really sound principles within human psychology.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's you talk about how it helps people, kids. I mean, it was designed for kids, but it also applies to people in general. You help them make better decisions. And, I think you were sort of implying this a moment ago, but, corporations and organizations in general are notorious for making some really bad decisions, as individuals and as groups. And that's the thing that really struck me, is that Love and Logic is a great framework to sort of create a certain amount of accountability and also an understanding of consequences for organizations. Every organization and leader we deal with, they have some sort of vision, easy answer, an easy answer with no consequences and no downside risk. And it's totally unrealistic. So what we do is try to frame it differently and say, well, no matter what decision you make, there's a risk. There's going to be something you don't like about it. So let's pick one. And here's the pros and cons of each. And here's what we think, but you decide whatever you want. You're the client. I mean, I'm oversimplifying, but that's the way it's affected me as a consultant. But tell me what have you seen, or how have you seen it used in, we talked a little bit about parenting, but focusing more on organizationally, how have you seen some of those principles used successfully in organizations you've consulted with or to?
Yes, if I'm a boss, I want to raise, just like a parent, I don't just want to raise an obedient kid. I want to raise a good decision maker, right? So if I'm a boss, I want to have a team of good decision makers, not just necessarily people who do what they're told without thinking critically or without understanding the why. I was a why kid growing up. I remember asking my parents the rationale, the why behind just about everything. And they usually had a good answer. And I was never a fan of because I said so. And so the same thing for a boss. If your answer is just because I'm the boss versus I have a really good reason behind this, there's good thinking and planning behind this decision. And I want that to spread all the way down to, the lowest person on my org chart. I want good thinkers and decision makers and responsible people. So yeah, the parallels are amazing because the very things I want out of kids I might be raising using these love and logic principles, that's exactly what I want on my team. I want good thinkers, good decision makers, and people who take responsibility.
Yeah, and especially in complex decisions, that aren't easy. You want them to critically think through all the nuances of those decisions.
I guess I want them to eat their vegetables too, just for their own good and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if that's an unintended secondary benefit, that's not a terrible thing either.
Yeah, it probably helps our bottom line and our company health plan or whatever.
Right, exactly. So you mentioned a moment ago.
I've had some chances. Oh, go ahead. That was my fault. I got a little bit of a delay, I think.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, apologies for that. Apologies to the audience. We do have a bit of a delay here. I think between the two of us, we were commiserating before we started this discussion that we're both having technical issues today with our respective broadband and Wi-Fi. But I was going to ask you a quick question around. You talked about emotional intelligence a moment ago or a few minutes ago. What when it comes to emotional intelligence, what are some of the biggest challenges that leaders within organizations typically face when it comes to emotional intelligence?
I think it's the balance. It's very difficult to balance the traits of a good leader because they can be seemingly conflicting. Again, same as in parenting, we talk about really you're just a leader. So I want to be love and logic says loving and firm at the same time. I want to be kind, but I want to be strong, contradicting one another. A leader has to balance things like rapport and respect, and one shouldn't be sacrificed for the other. Things like confidence versus the no matter what, because I'm the leader, because I said so. That tends to, I think that's probably the biggest one that gets leaders in trouble, is we all have an ego, and if we're not careful, we can surround ourselves only with people that feed that ego and tell us we're right, versus the idea of I'm going to have this growth mindset as a leader, and I'm going to embrace feedback. We always say feedback is our friend. Good feedback, especially coming from a caring source that's aligned with my goals, that's our best friend. But some leaders, you've probably seen this, they get kind of me syndrome, and they get to a place where their voice is the only voice that matters. And unfortunately, we miss out as leaders on a lot of really good perspective and a lot of good feedback if people don't feel free to share differing ideas. And this goes back to Mission Peace too. There are people that just kind of bullying each other on the internet. You're not allowed to disagree with me. You're not allowed to have a different opinion. It's not just that you have a different opinion. If you disagree, it's because you're a bad person. And I'd actually like to see us all get a little bit more thick-skinned in the sense of it's okay if we disagree. It's actually necessary. Differing views on an issue, it's really important to get to the best information. We have to have these different perspectives. In my very first podcast, I have a podcast too, it's called Cooler Heads. and the whole premise is helping people get along better. But I mentioned the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers, figured out how to get us up in the air. They disagreed a lot. They didn't wake up every day on the same page as far as how to fly, and they would really spar and go at each other, but they kept the relationship positive. They obviously cared about each other and they cared about their goal. So we shouldn't be afraid of disagreement, especially as a leader. I think that insecure, no one's allowed to contradict me. That's probably the most paralyzing weakness in terms of emotional intelligence that I see in some leaders, sadly.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good reminder, especially, a larger, more complex organization with more diverse people. You're just going to get inherently different opinions and different philosophies, which shouldn't be considered a bad thing. I mean, that's what makes strong teams is that diversity in thinking.
Yeah, let's not fear that.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a great point. And even just tying it, you were talking about the not being afraid to look at counterpoints and understand different points of view. Relating it to our industry and what we do, one thing that we notice in our industry of digital transformation is that you have software companies and software vendors and consultants that all sort of think the same, and they have these same flawed implementation approaches that have really caused a lot of failures in the industry. And a lot of it's because it's sort of like a group think, not thinking outside the box sort of a mentality where we're just going to go in and implement technology, but we're not thinking about the human side of change. We're not thinking about process improvements and some of the non-technology aspects. They're just so myopically focused on technology, and we're not necessarily always open to those ideas of, hey, maybe there's a reason all these failures are happening. Maybe it's because we're doing something wrong, and we should be open to other ideas and alternates to what we've been fed for the last several decades from the technology industry. So I think that's what you just said resonates. It maybe in a slightly different way than what you intended, but it resonates really well in our industry and in my experience as well.
One of the first kind of tech side companies that I got to consult with were some video game guys. And they obviously, whenever they create a new game, they try to break it. They try to find the flaws and the bugs. And so this idea, once they got it, it resonated with them. Oh, okay, if we have an idea, we need to try to break it just like we would a new game. We need to find the flaws. We need to I think when you're at your height as a leader, you can already anticipate the yeah buts and the counterpoints and the why this won't work and some of the resistance that you might get when you're trying to implement something. And we shouldn't approach that from a place of fear. We should embrace it and say, let's get all this on the table and may the best ideas win.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in today's ever-changing world, it's changing faster and faster, and you need that diversity of thinking to make sure you're addressing your own blind spots as a leader or as a peer team member.
I've learned that from watching you a little bit, that something comes along or something changes, and should we just jump on this bandwagon because everyone's doing it, or is it really better? I think that's an important thing that you always raise is let's not just do it because, let's really figure out what's going to work best.
Yeah. So I agree with that. And why do you think it is that leaders so commonly struggle with emotional intelligence, or organizations in general, organizations and their leaders? Why is emotional intelligence such a problem or a deficiency for a lot of people and organizations?
I was thinking about that. It seems like people end up in leadership positions for different reasons, but one big reason is usually they're a strong personality. And I've watched people with strong personalities, the farther they go, it seems like sometimes the less resistance they get, because people realize, oh, strong personality, resistance is futile, so we'll just go along. And the more time, the more experience you have of not having anybody, question or challenge an idea, it becomes your expectation, it becomes everybody's expectation around you. And pretty soon, you can be a tyrant if you're not careful. So I think humility, again, the self-awareness and the humility and the actually not fragile ego these are all good traits of a good leader. Whereas we've seen instances where a leader who just is so afraid of anybody questioning them, or so afraid of being wrong or looking stupid, which to me, that really comes from a lack of humility. That's where leaders tend to get in trouble. So if we really wanted to simplify it, back to love and logic terms, maybe some of our leaders didn't struggle enough or get challenged enough or have enough times where they were wrong or made mistakes or had to own those. And so they're just not good at it because they don't have enough practice. So a great thing for a leader is to have another strong personality who's not afraid to say, well, here's at least another way of looking at that. And obviously it has to be a healthy, intentional communication where it doesn't become toxic disagreement or disagreement just for the sake of, which is another thing that is a lot. It's plentiful on the internet. I'll just be the naysayer just because. But I think for the leader, yeah, the self-awareness to say, I don't want to become this voice that nobody can oppose, because once in a while, at least, I'm going to be wrong.
Yeah. Very, very true, and good point. We actually have a question that I wanted to get to, a question from the audience. This is from Ahmed on YouTube. And by the way, if you're on LinkedIn on the live stream, I'm having trouble getting into the live stream, so I'm not even sure if the stream is working on LinkedIn, but I know it is on YouTube. And Ahmed has a question here, which I think is a great one, which is, first of all, good session. Thank you. I appreciate if you can shed some light on micromanagement and its effect on corporate organizations. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, love that question. Sadly, too close. I really believe the micromanager, it comes from a place of fear. I think a lot of times my propensity to micromanage is because I'm afraid, and I can't just trust that things are going to be okay, or that our plan is good, or that my people are capable. So usually micromanager is a leader who's coming from a place of fear. And if I work with a company, that's one of the things I'm going to try to do is break down and say, what are we really afraid of? And sometimes it's okay to go to the worst case scenario. What's the worst thing that could happen here? And a lot of times what we're afraid of isn't nearly as bad as, the fear itself or what we're worried is going to happen. But yeah, my short answer is I think micromanagement tends to come from fear. And I think the antidote to that, this may sound a little crazy, but I think the antidote to fear a lot of times is relationship. When I really trust you, and if you think about this in a marriage or with a best friend, when I really know you and I really trust you, that relationship tends to kind of erode the fear. A lot of times when we're afraid, it's more the unknown, the unfamiliar, the thing we don't know what to expect. So the longer we can go, and if we build this positive relationship, I think that helps alleviate some of that fear. Now, if I have a leader who's just their base personality is to overly worry, that means there's some self-awareness work that leader needs to do. So if it's me doing it, the antidote self-awareness. If it's coming from somewhere else, I would, with a company, I'd actually work on building a stronger and more positive relationship between the parties involved. Because then when I trust you, I don't have to micromanage you. I know it's you, Eric, you're going to do a great job. I don't need to micromanage you because we have a relationship and I know.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I guess it's almost like, in the absence, the relationship, it seems like the relationship creates knowledge in some ways. It's a comfort, it's knowledge, it's a understanding. And in the absence of that knowledge and understanding and comfort, I guess in some cases, I might assume the worst, depending on what my personality is or, my general level of trust. I might assume the worst, and therefore I'm going to micromanage because I'm assuming the worst. I don't have the information, I don't have the trust, I don't have the confidence. Is that sort of what you're saying? It kind of feeds into it?
That's it. I'm sort of sad that you said it better than I did, but yeah, that's it exactly.
Because I have
If
no
I
idea what
think
I'm talking
about
about. Yeah.
a dark street, if I see a stranger on the dark street, I might be a little more inherently afraid of a stranger. But if I see oh, that's my friend, the fear is going to go away. I know this person. I think that happens a lot in business when we have a relationship. It helps us just be less afraid. Almost by definition, there's going to be some trust in that relationship that hopefully makes me less worried that I need to micromanage this other person.
Right. Yeah. Makes total sense. Um,
So
Shifting gears here.
if I have a boss who's a micromanager, I'm actually saying become closer and better friends with that boss who's the micromanager, which is probably counterintuitive.
That's great advice. I've never thought of that. I've had micromanager bosses, back in the day before I was the boss, but I never thought that never even occurred to me that could be a good antidote to that. So that's great advice. What about emotional intelligence, or not emotional intelligence? We already talked about that. Organizational culture. When you think about organizational culture, which I know culture in general is an area that you're keen on and well, but how would you describe it? How does it affect? How can it affect or positively affect an organization? And how can it affect positive change? So maybe just start with culture in general. Why is it important? How does it affect an organization?
Yeah, I'm kind of a sports guy, and so I think about sports teams, and we can be kind of the sum of the ability of the different people on the team. And so if I'm hiring, I want to hire as many emotionally intelligent people as possible. We can train some things into people, but if someone's kind of base personality is very selfish and not caring very much about other people, that's a tough thing to overcome. I'd actually rather have a kind of a giver personality who knows less because I can train them in, whatever the logistics might be. But that person who's really, really just inherently selfish, that's a hard thing to overcome. When it comes to the culture, what I look for is, I'll go back to this growth mindset. It's probably a book that you've recommended, the book Mindset, Carol Dweck. We're big fans. I want people on the team that have this growth mindset. I think one of the more toxic things to an organizational culture is the people who are stuck in the old way, and that's just the way it is. And I think they almost become comfortable complaining. I see this in professions. Again, I'm working with a lot of teachers, and many of them wonderful. There's a certain segment of teachers that are kind of happy martyrs, and in a sense that our job is so tough and our job is so bad. I see this now as a thing to battle against in the culture of a law enforcement agency. We have this really tough job, and nobody understands how hard it is. And I want to have empathy for that position. Yes, it really is hard, and still a growth mindset. Let's not sit here helpless and say this is so tough and there's nothing we can do about it. I worked with teenagers in trouble for a long time before I worked for Love and Logic. And there was a certain segment of our staff that would want to go to the bar afterwards and talk about how bad the kids were. And those were not my people. My people were the ones who wanted to share the amazing success stories, because I feel like hope and optimism, especially working with people who have been through a lot of tough stuff, those are almost magic bullets, versus that sort of pessimistic, woe is us, it's never going to get any better. That to me is really the anchor bringing down a lot of organizational cultures. So yeah, give me the optimistic person, give me the growth minded person. And once in a while, there are people who are just not a good fit for my organization. And I think the selfish pessimist is the person I really would like to cut from the team before the regular season starts.
Right. Now that's a great great point, and a couple great points there. One is the hope and optimism, and how that's gonna win in the end, and that can be very powerful. I think if we let it, I guess is sort of the caveat. If you let hope and optimism be there, it's gonna win. The problem is a lot of times we don't let it in. We focus on the negative. We kind of drag ourselves down, and there's nothing else there to buoy us back up. So since you're a sports guy, I have to ask you the
because
question.
we get trained to only look for problems.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I'm sorry, I was just saying, sometimes our brains get trained to look for problems, and then we get so used to looking for problems that's what we see.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there's I think this might be the third week in a row this topic has come up now, and now it's perfect for you given that you just brought up the sports analogy. But have you seen the show Ted Lasso on Apple Plus?
Yes.
So I find that show fascinating for the reasons you just said, because it's a sports team and he's trying to create a chemistry, he's trying to create a culture, and he's got some, one in particular star player who is very talented. Probably I think it's his best player. It's a young superstar on the team, big name, and but he's not a good cultural fit, and so that creates a lot of drama and subplots and things he has to deal with, trying to figure out how to create chemistry at the same time as trying to create talent and trying to win. So I guess just kind of coming back to that, bringing it full circle, how can have you seen organizational culture be powerful enough to where it enables an organization to win in that way? I know it's not necessarily a win and a loss like in sports, but it can be. I mean, if you're either successful or you're not, oftentimes as an organization, do you see it having a direct impact on that?
Yes. So my most frequent clients for the past 10 years have been schools in inner cities, really tough schools. And sometimes we were brought in to really try to turn the school around. And it's amazing. It can be the same neighborhood. It can be the same kind of socioeconomic stats, poverty levels, and things that one would assume, oh, this is a really tough school. And I've literally gone to schools that were blocks apart, and they were night and day based on the positive culture versus the negative culture. And I think in particular, and educators will see this, but that optimism and that belief that things can get better versus that sort of learned helplessness that this is just a really awful place and these kids are awful and there's nothing we can do to make it better. I've watched that create, and so absolutely yes. I think, and honestly, I think complaining it's a symptom, but also a cause, because it becomes a habit. It's a pet peeve of mine. I feel like, well, there's some studies on this now. Where complaining actually changes our brain. If we complain all the time, our brains hear that in an undeletable form. You can ignore or delete lots of different things that come into your brain through your senses, but my own voice, my brain doesn't delete my voice. That's why affirmations work. People say positive affirmations out loud. Well, for the same reason, my brain hears this complaining, and it actually is training my own brain to look for what's bad. And I've just seen that be so horrendous to a culture. It's not that you're not allowed to raise issues or problems, but if you're constantly complaining, your brain hears that, everyone else hears it, and it's just terrible for the culture.
So in addition to that,
I would say one other, an antidote for that is have a forum in which people can raise legitimate issues, in a safe and solution-oriented way, rather than just the, is it okay to say bitch session?
Sure.
I think everybody feels like they need to vent sometimes, but too much of that, obviously that gets really toxic. And I would say it's more destructive than people even think.
Yeah, agreed. And it snowballs and builds momentum in a bad way. But in addition to that negativity, what are some of the other challenges that you commonly see with organizational culture?
This might be slightly related to our micromanager discussion, but I think the lack of trust sometimes from leaders to the people that they're leading. I would like to err on the side of believing that my people are capable. So I'm also the parent of 2 kids with special needs, and this was the best advice that the Love and Logic founders ever gave me, and it's always err on the side of believing that they're capable. And the exception would be when it's something that's not safe. So I didn't hand my kids the car keys when they were 5 and just say, oh, they'll probably be fine, because that's not safe. But if it came down to trusting that they could do something or believing that they were capable or not, I'd rather err on the side of believing they're capable. So I think that's a big deal with leaders. Is sometimes it's my own issue still, letting myself trust those people that they can get it done, maybe until they prove otherwise, or that they need some more help or some more direction. But I see the best leaders, they tend to really be invested in empowering their people. And then sometimes my ego will say, I'm the only one that knows, or I'm the only one that can do this. And if I don't do it myself, it's not going to get done right. You hear stuff like that. To me, a really good leader is constantly trying to kind of grow those seeds of the people that they're leading so that they become more capable. And then if I'm the leader, my life gets better and easier.
Yeah, you have a really talented team around you, and it to some that might be a threat, because that could be a potential successor, or they might displace you as the leader, I guess, in theory. But if you kind of set that aside and don't worry about that, by creating all these great team members and creating a great team, that just makes you a better leader, and to your point, it makes it easier as a leader too.
Yeah, you don't have to be threatened by those good people around you. They're an asset, and you should be glad they're on your team.
Exactly. Yeah, and not someone else's, or a different company's team, for sure. What about, you talked a little bit about at the beginning, or not at the beginning, but a few minutes ago, you were talking about conflict in general, and how we all have different opinions, and Jerry Springer moments and all that stuff. But in the work we do, we're dealing with really business and technology transformation. So we're dealing with fairly significant, massive changes that in some cases are being imposed on the company because the economy is changing, the competition's eating their lunch, and they have to change to survive. In other cases, organizations are trying to just be more strategic and get a competitive advantage. And so they're going through a situation where they're changing to get that strategic advantage. But either way, it's a massive amount of change. It creates a lot of tension, a lot of conflict. It threatens people's, political position in the companies. It changes their jobs. It makes them feel like a fish out of water at times, because they have to learn something totally new. What are some tips for leaders that are going through that sort of transformation, which is much, I'd say most of the people listening right now are people that are either leading or part of a massive change within their organizations. What tips would you have for those sorts of leaders to sort of de-escalate and to neutralize that tension and that conflict that goes along with change?
Yeah, I would really lean into relationship and trust early, so that when we go through something that's difficult, and a friend of mine recently said, and he's a great consultant to businesses, and he said, you're going through a change, you need a friend. Who doesn't need someone that they feel close to, that they feel comfortable with, that they feel some trust for when they're going through something, which change is always a little bit scary. So I think the best leaders are proactive about building this relationship, sort of positive vibe between the parties before we take the hill, or have to charge and do that difficult thing. Let's make sure there's at least a professional bond of trust. I mean, we don't have to necessarily be best friends and all hang out together after hours, but I think I have to feel a positive connection with that person if I'm going to go through a change with them, because change is scary. And I want people around me that I feel trust and comfort with if I'm going through a change. That's probably underestimated as for leaders as a step before we go through this change. I think we do lots of warning and telling people this is going to be really hard. Let's take a little bit of extra time to care about each other and be kind and empathetic with one another. That will go a long way as we're going through the difficult stuff. And then you see this on the other end. When we've gone through tough stuff together, it tends to strengthen the relationship. As long as we didn't turn on each other and try to kill one another.
Right. That's an important caveat, an important prerequisite to effective change and de-escalation, I would imagine. So what about
one other thought I think is let's not be afraid of the conflict.
Sorry, say that again. Don't be afraid of.
Don't be afraid of disagreeing. Don't be afraid of at least conflicting opinions.
Right. So there's a difference there, right? I mean, tension and conflict don't necessarily need to be one and the same with disagreement or spirited debate or healthy debate, right? I mean, would you agree with that, or is there how do you delineate between the two?
I took one group that I consulted with through just an exercise to prove to them that it was okay to disagree. I think we debated something completely pointless, like this group, they were college football fans, and so we debated how they did overtime. They changed a few years ago. They changed the way they did overtime in college football, which inconsequential really to most of our lives. But I had them debate, should it be this way or this way? Had nothing to do with their job or their organization, just to sort of prove, okay, we can disagree. And I may not even know where my coworker stands on this issue, but neither one of us died, and we don't have to hate each other just because we disagreed. I think that's a fairly healthy thing, is just, it's okay for us to be different. Some of the healthiest schools I've been to have been in areas where there's a real rivalry. So I went to a school in Alabama, and about half the staff were Auburn fans and half the staff were Alabama fans. And that's a bitter rivalry.
Yeah.
But actually very healthy. They would go at each other, but it was almost like, oh, this is okay. This is safe. We can do this. And I think it actually fostered some healthier disagreement about stuff that really did matter.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. It's sort of a the stakes are lower in that debate too, so it kind of helps you in a safe way have the work through some of that tension and conflict.
Yeah, just if you were lifting weights, you'd start with a lighter weight. So yeah, let's be able to disagree about something where the stakes aren't too high or life and death. We might get some letters from people who are Alabama or Auburn fans saying, actually, that is pretty big deal. But
right,
you know what I mean.
Life and death does. Right. So what about so you've been kind of talking about this in the context of situations that arise that create conflict and healthy debate that sort of evolves into tenser situations. Is there a way, and maybe you may have already sort of answered this with the Auburn versus Alabama exercise, but is there a way that other ways that leaders could maybe mitigate or minimize the potential likelihood that you're going to end up in a tense, high degree of conflict, but still encourage without losing the need to encourage healthy debate? I mean, is there a way to navigate that to sort of prevent it before it ever gets to that point of overly tense conflict?
The big one that I talk to leaders about is modeling some humility, modeling that ability to be wrong and admit that I'm wrong and that it's not the end of the world when I make a mistake. I think that's an important one. A leader can intentionally model, hey, even me, the boss, even me, the leader, I can get it wrong. I can be corrected. Feedback is my friend. I don't have to get super upset or lash out at the person who pointed out my error.
Right. Yeah. So that kind of all starts with that leader, the leader and the leader's behavior and approach. And, you're sort of setting the tone as a leader, I suppose, is really what you're saying.
Yeah, a lot more leadership is modeling than we realize. Just like parenting, it's kids modeling what they see from me, which is bad news because it means I have to behave in front of my kids at least.
Right.
I have to
Right.
make good decisions and behave well. But if the people I'm leading see me humble enough to admit my mistakes and be disagreed with, right, about it, I think that sets the tone, and we kind of make the weather where it agrees. And I think the whole world needs more of that, not just organizations.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we all as individuals and humans can definitely use more of that, and for ourselves and the people around us too, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, what about I guess just to sort of you tie this all together, all the stuff we've been talking about so far. You think about leading change, whether you're a leader in an organization or whether you are a team member, consultant, whatever the case may be, or you're thinking about going through a massive change as an organization. What sort of closing advice would you leave for people involved in that sort of organizational change? If you had to leave sort of those tidbits that sort of summarizes what we've talked about, or maybe anything we haven't covered, what are those tidbits of, like, these are the top things you should really think about, or have, be top of mind as you're going through your transformation?
I'm kind of thinking about our key principles at Mission Peace. I'll just run through a few of them real quick, but it starts with respectful engagement, again, which is we define as a decision we make ahead of time. I'm going to stay respectful no matter what. We talk about intentional messaging, really being thoughtful about what we're communicating, and whether it be, this is something I work with companies, the verbal communication, the nonverbal, the written, if an email comes out or a memo, how to word that, and also on the customer service side, how to answer an angry customer email or vendor email or whatever. There's so much to being intentional about our communication. So many problems could be prevented if we were just a little bit more intentional about our messaging. The last one is thoughtful assessment. We were sort of just talking about that, the ability to honestly evaluate, how did that go? What could we do better? How could we grow and learn from this? And I think the last thing I would say is be more people oriented than you even think. I think a lot of companies go, we care about our people, we're people oriented. Be even more about that individual. Be thinking, whatever the size of your organization, be thinking about the individual. What are they going through? This is what empathy really is that it's not even my ability to put myself in your shoes. It's my willingness to, my commitment to really trying to understand what's going on. Understanding that I can't really truly understand, but I'm going to try my very best to. But be more invested in those individuals than you even think, because that strong bond around you with that team is probably going to take you further, even than a good strategy.
Yeah, great stuff. I mean, the one that might have stood out the most, which, saying it out loud now just sounds so basic. Like, how could this possibly be the the biggest takeaway from this conversation for me? But it's that relationship piece that you were talking about. It seems like so much of what we're talking about is, you think back to root causes and, what cause and effect and the symptoms that you see in organizational dynamics and the tense situations is the relationships. I mean, you've talked a lot about how the relationships and communication and the trust that you build between people. Once you have that, if I trust you and I don't agree with you, I'm probably not going to treat you like garbage. and I'm not going to be disparaging to you because I don't like your idea. I'm probably going to listen to you because I trust you, I know you, I like you, or whatever. And it's just it sounds so basic again saying it out loud, but it's just something that is so basic that I think a lot of times we just forget about it, or you just sort of lose sight of a real easy, not an easy solution, but it's not necessarily rocket science in terms of how to solve some of those dynamics.
That's it. And it is simple, but that stance of respect and appreciation for my fellows, that's the stuff I teach. And to me, that's going to make a company better. There's plenty of other flaws that smarter people than me can fix, but to me, that one is so foundational, and it'll make any organization better.
Right. No, that's great. That's great. Great closing advice. I appreciate that, and I really appreciate having you on the show. It's good to sort of dive into your profession and what you've been up to the last decades, and really understanding and sort of connecting the dots with what you do with what we do. And there's just so much commonality there. I really appreciate having you here on the show today.
It's a great pleasure. It's really an honor to be with you, and I enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, likewise. And I hope the audience appreciated it too. Thank you to everyone who joined here live. Apologies for the technical issues. Hopefully you could hear us okay for most of the time. I know both of our videos were cutting in and out at times. So thank you for bearing with us, and hopefully you got some good content out of this. And if you, for some reason, missed part of this discussion here today, we are going to we're going to package it into our Transformation Ground Control podcast, which will come out a week from this Wednesday. So check my YouTube channel, check all the podcast platforms for Transformation Ground Control. You'll get a cleaned up, edited version of this discussion that'll hopefully address some of those technical issues. And certainly you can pick up the other content that you may have missed in the discussion here today if you missed part of the discussion. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. Happy Friday. Have a great weekend. And thank you again, Jedd. And hope you all have a great week. We'll see you all soon.